The air in the university conference room felt cold and thin, like the atmosphere on a distant, unwelcoming planet. Annika stood at the front, alone, facing a sea of faces. They weren't hostile faces, not exactly. Hostility would have been better. It would have been honest. Instead, they wore the polite, blank masks of people who had already made up their minds. The low hum of the air conditioner was the only sound, a steady, monotonous drone that seemed to suck all the warmth out of the room. For 50 years, the mystery of the vellum shards had sat on the shelves of this very university. Fragments of pottery, dug from a high-altitude desert in South America, covered in symbols that no one could ever read. The official story, carved into stone by the most respected minds in archaeology and linguistics, was that the symbols were a form of proto-writing. A beautiful but failed attempt at language, a little dead end on the long road of human communication. The man who had written that story is the old professor with the silver hair and the commanding presence, sitting in the front row, his hands folded neatly on the table in front of him. He hadn't looked at her yet. Annika took a deep breath, her heart thumping a nervous rhythm against her ribs. She had once been a star pupil in this department. They had praised her sharp mind, her dedication. Now, she felt like an exhibit they had come to stare at before they dismantled it. "Thank you for coming," she began, her voice a little shakier than she'd hoped. She clicked a button, and the first image appeared on the large screen behind her, a close-up of the swirling, intricate glyphs. "For generations, we have tried to read these. We've treated them like letters, like words, like sentences from a language we lost. We have failed." She paused, letting the words hang in the air. She saw a few people shift in their seats. A young researcher in the second row scribbled a note, probably something about her tone. "What if we've been asking the wrong question?" Annika continued, her voice growing stronger as she found her rhythm. "What if these were never meant to be read? What if they were meant to be seen?" She clicked the button again. The single image of the shard was replaced by a complex three-dimensional model she had built herself over 2 years of sleepless nights. It was a web of interconnected points of light, each point corresponding to one of the glyphs. It slowly rotated in the digital space, a beautiful, silent constellation. "This is not a language," she said, a spark of passion igniting in her chest. "This is a map, a star map." A low murmur went through the room. It wasn't a gasp of shock, but a soft, collective sigh of disappointment. It was the sound of people's suspicions being confirmed. She could almost hear their thoughts. There it is. The crazy idea. She pressed on, her words flowing faster now. She explained how each glyph wasn't a symbol for a sound or an idea, but a coordinate, a set of numbers and angles that pointed to a specific star. She showed them how the position of the symbols on the curved pottery shards was crucial, how it gave the map depth. She demonstrated how, when you entered all the data into a simulation, the image it created wasn't of the Earth's sky as it is today, or even 1,000 years ago. It was the sky as it would have appeared 12,000 years ago. From a specific point in the Andes Mountains, the people who made these weren't just writing about their world, she said, her eyes sweeping across the room, trying to make just one person see what she saw. They were charting the cosmos. They had a knowledge of astronomy that we are only just now catching up to. This changes everything we think we know about ancient civilizations. She finished her presentation and stood there, the slowly rotating star map glowing behind her. For a moment, there was silence. Then the department head, a man with a tired, kind face, stood up. "Thank you, Dr. Sharma. That was a very creative presentation. Are there any questions?" The silence that followed was heavy and uncomfortable. People looked at their notepads, at the ceiling, at their hands. No one wanted to be the first to speak. Finally, a woman from the linguistics department raised her hand. "Dr. Sharma," she began, her voice carefully neutral, "have you considered that your theory, while imaginative, completely disregards 50 years of established research on contextual analysis? The tools found alongside these shards were agricultural. There is no other evidence to suggest a society capable of this level of astronomical understanding." Annika had expected this. "The lack of other evidence is precisely why this is so important," she replied calmly. Perhaps we've been misinterpreting the other evidence because we didn't have the right context. The map is the key. A few more tepid questions followed, each one a gentle but firm pushback. They were picking at the edges, avoiding the core of her argument. They were treating her like a child who had drawn a wonderful picture of a dragon and was now trying to convince them it was real then. The old professor in the front row slowly raised his hand. The room went instantly quiet. All eyes turned to him. He finally looked at Annika, but his gaze was not kind. It was the look a doctor gives a patient with a terminal diagnosis. "Dr. Sharma," said, his voice soft but carrying the weight of authority. "I have been in this field for 60 years. I have dedicated my life to understanding the slow, beautiful, and often clumsy journey of the human mind. Your theory? It is not science. It is a fantasy." He leaned forward slightly, his eyes pinning her to the spot. "You have taken a precious archaeological artifact, a window into our past, and you have turned it into a science fiction story? It is an insult to the people who made these shards, and it is an insult to the discipline of archaeology. This is not a new perspective. It is a cry for attention, wrapped in the language of mathematics, but empty of scientific rigor. Frankly, I am embarrassed for this department." The words hit her like physical blows. Each one was precise, designed to humiliate. She felt her face flush hot. A cry for attention. An insult. Embarrassed. She saw the heads in the audience nodding in agreement. The debate was over. She hadn't just lost, she had been erased. The department head quickly stood up. "Thank you all for your time. This session is concluded." People began to gather their things, their chatter filling the room now that the tension was broken. They didn't look at her. It was as if she had become invisible. As the room emptied, Annika stood frozen in the spotlight at the front of the room. The silent, spinning star map her only companion. The old professor was the last to leave. He paused at the door, turned back to her, and gave a small, sad shake of his head before walking out. The next few days were a blur of quiet, professional cruelty. An email from the dean's office informed her that her research grant was being reallocated. The journal that had been reviewing her paper sent a curt rejection, citing a fundamental lack of scholarly basis. The department head called her into his office. "He wouldn't meet her eyes, Annika," he said, sighing. "Perhaps it would be best for everyone if you took some time off. A sabbatical, too. Rethink your approach." She knew what that meant. She was being pushed out. Her office was to be cleaned out by the end of the week. Her name was removed from the course schedule. In a matter of days, Dr. Annika Sharma, the promising young academic, had become Doctor Who. A cautionary tale whispered in the hallways. Late one night, lone in her nearly empty office, she printed out one last image of the star map. She held the piece of paper in her hands, tracing the lines of light with her finger. They could take her office, her funding, her reputation. They could call her a fool, a fantasist, an embarrassment. But as she looked at the intricate, beautiful pattern on the page, she knew, with a certainty that settled deep in her bones, that it was real. They didn't believe in her. Not yet, but they would. They had to. The silence in the house was a heavy blanket. For the first week after the meeting, Annika just walked through the rooms of her small home, a ghost in her own life. The cardboard box from her office sat in the corner of the living room, a monument to her failure. She didn't unpack it. Looking at the spines of the book's titles on linguistic theory and archaeological methodology felt like touching a hot stove. Every word was a reminder of the world that had cast her out. Her phone stayed silent except for the cautious, worried texts from her sister and the daily, predictable call from her ex-husband, Rohan. "Annika, are you eating?" he'd ask, his voice a careful blend of concern and distance. They had been separated for 2 years, but he still felt responsible. A duty she both appreciated and resented. "I'm fine." "Rohan, just taking some time," she would reply, the lie feeling like a stone in her throat. She wasn't fine. She was untethered, adrift. The certainty that had fueled her for years now felt like a madness. What if the old professor was right? What if she had built a beautiful, intricate fantasy from nothing but dust and wishful thinking? The thought was a cold knot in her stomach. The turning point came on a rainy Tuesday. Her 11-year-old daughter, Mira, came home from school and found her mother staring at the blank television screen. "Mama?" Mira asked, her small voice pulling Annika back from the edge. "Why are you so sad?" Annika looked at her daughter's face, so open and full of trust. In that moment, she knew she couldn't let the doubt win. She had to know, one way or the other. For Mira, if not for herself. "Because I lost something, sweetie," Annika said, her voice thick. "And I have to find it again." That night, she carried the box of books to the garage. The space smelled of oil and damp concrete, a world away from the polished halls of the university. She cleared a corner, setting up an old folding table. She brought in her laptop, a second-hand monitor, and a tall stack of star charts she'd bought online. It wasn't a lab. It was a fortress. A lonely, cold fortress, but it was hers. Her new life began. While the world outside moved on, Annika's world shrunk to the four walls of the garage. Her days were a blur of coffee and code, her nights lit by the cool glow of the monitor. She became a creature of the shadows, emerging only to make meals for Mira or to walk her to the bus stop. The other mothers at the stop would give her sad, knowing smiles. She heard the whispers through the grapevine, the rumors that Dr. Sharma had had a complete breakdown. It was easier for them to believe she was crazy than to believe she might be right. Rohan's calls grew more insistent. "Annika," Mira, "tells me you're sleeping in the garage. This isn't healthy. You need to let this go. Get back to teaching. They'll take you back, I'm sure, if you just apologize." Apologize for what? For being right. She'd shot back once, her voice raw with frustration. The call had ended in tense silence. He didn't understand. He couldn't. He was a practical man, an accountant. To him, her quest was a financial and emotional liability. To her, it was the only thing that was real. But she wasn't entirely alone. Mira became her quiet confidant. The little girl would curl up on an old armchair in the corner, doing her homework while Annika worked. She didn't understand the complex equations or the astronomical data, but she understood her mother's passion. She would bring Annika mugs of tea and draw little pictures of stars and rockets to pin on the garage wall. "Mama, what does this one mean?" Mira asked one evening, pointing to a small, squiggly glyph on a printout of the shard. Annika had almost dismissed it. It was one of the few symbols that didn't neatly fit into her coordinate system. She had labeled it an anomaly, or a scribe's error. But looking at it through her daughter's eyes, she saw it again, fresh. It wasn't a static mark. It had a flow, a sense of movement, like a wave. "I don't know, my love," Annika said, her mind suddenly racing. "I always thought it was a mistake. What if it's not a letter or a star?" Mira said, swinging her legs. "What if it's a verb? Like something is doing something?" A verb. Something is doing something. The words echoed in Annika's mind long after Mira had gone to bed. She had been treating the map as a static snapshot of the sky, a photograph from 12,000 years ago. But what if it wasn't? What if it was a movie? The squiggly symbol wasn't a place. It was a process, a change over time. The thought was a jolt of electricity. She dove back into her data, her fingers flying across the keyboard. She started feeding time-based variables into her simulation, using the verb symbol as her guide. The computer worked for days, processing trillions of calculations. She barely slept, sustained by a newfound frantic energy. She was no longer just trying to prove the map was real. She was trying to understand what it was saying. Finally, on the fourth day, the simulation stopped. A single line of text appeared on the screen. It wasn't a star chart. It was a prediction. It described a rare and incredibly violent celestial event, the collision of two neutron stars. It gave a precise set of coordinates in deep space, and then it gave a date. Annika stared at the screen, her heart pounding. The date was 6 months and 3 days away. The map wasn't just a record of where they had looked. It was a message about where to look and when. It was an invitation, a test. She printed out the results, her hands trembling slightly. The 6-month deadline was a terrifying gift. It gave her a concrete goal, a finish line, but it also amplified the stakes. If she was wrong, there would be no more room for doubt. She would be a fool forever. She walked into the house and found the wall calendar in the kitchen. With a red marker, she slowly, deliberately circled the date. It looked like a drop of blood on the page. The loneliness of the garage was still there. The whispers of her colleagues still echoed in her mind. But now, they were just background noise. She had a mission. She had a date with destiny written in the stars by a civilization that had been gone for millennia, and she would be ready. The 6-month deadline became a drumbeat in the back of Annika's mind, constant, steady rhythm that pushed her forward through the long days and even longer nights. The garage had become her entire world, a small, cluttered universe ruled by star charts and complex calculations. The first thing she did after discovering the prediction was to try and do what any responsible scientist would: share her findings with the wider community. She believed, with a naive sort of hope, the sheer weight of the data would be enough to make them listen. She spent a week crafting the perfect email. It was professional, concise, and packed with evidence. She attached her simulation, the star charts, and her detailed analysis of the vellum shards. With a deep breath, she sent it not just to one, but to a dozen of the world's leading astronomical observatories and research foundations. She sent it to the powerful, government-funded foundation that her old professor helped lead, a final, desperate attempt to appeal to the man who had destroyed her career. Then, she waited. The first week passed in silence. Her inbox remained empty, save for the usual spam and newsletters she'd forgotten to unsubscribe from. She told herself it was normal. These were busy people. They've got thousands of emails a day. They needed time to process it. The second week brought a few replies. They were not what she had hoped for. They were form letters. Polite, impersonal, and utterly devastating. "Thank you for your submission," one read. "Unfortunately, due to the high volume of inquiries, we are unable to review unsolicited theories at this time. We wish you the best in your research." Another was even more blunt. "Your proposal does not align with our current observational priorities." Each rejection was a small paper cut, and soon she was bleeding from 1,000 of them. The silence from the old professor's foundation was the loudest and most painful rejection of all. It was a statement in itself. She wasn't even worth a form letter. As the weeks turned into a month, quiet desperation began to set in. Her savings, which were never large to begin with, were shrinking. The credit card bills for the specialized software and telescope time she had purchased were starting to pile up on the kitchen counter. A growing mountain of debt. Rohan's calls became more frequent and more worried. "Annika, I talked to a friend," he said one evening, his voice strained. "He knows a headmistress at a good private school. They're looking for a history teacher. The pay isn't great, but it's stable. It's a way back." She closed her eyes, leaning her head against the cool concrete wall of the garage. "I don't want a way back, Rohan. I want to move forward." "This isn't moving forward," he said, his voice rising in frustration. This is obsession. You're in a garage, talking to yourself, spending money we don't have, chasing a ghost. What happens in 5 months when this thing doesn't happen? What then? What about Mira? Is this fair to her?" His words struck her like a physical blow. The one thing she held on to, the one justification for all of this, was that she was doing it for the truth, and in a way, for Mira, to show her that you don't give up, that you fight for what you believe in. But was Rohan right? Was she sacrificing her daughter's stability on the altar of a mad dream? Later that night, Mira found her staring at a stack of rejection letters printed out on the table. Her little face scrunched up with concern. "Mama, why are they being so mean?" she asked, her voice small. Annika sighed, pulling her daughter into a hug. "Because they don't believe me, my love. They think I'm making it all up." Mira pulled back, her brow furrowed in thought. "But you're not. You showed me the numbers. They're real." "They are real to us," Annika said softly. "Then you should just show everyone," Mira said, with the simple, unshakable logic of a child. "Like on my tablet. You can make a video and put it on the internet. Then everyone can see. Annika looked at her daughter, then at the smartphone lying on the table. The idea felt absurd, desperate. She was a scientist, not a YouTuber. Her place was in peer-reviewed journals and conference halls, not in the chaotic, often cruel world of social media. But as she looked at the printed rejections, at the closed doors and the silent phones, she realized she had no doors left to knock on. This wasn't just her last resort. It was her only resort, the next day with Mira as her reluctant technical director. She set up a small tripod in the corner of the garage. Behind her, she taped a large sheet of white paper to the wall. She felt foolish and exposed. Her first few attempts were a disaster. She was stiff. Her voice was shaky. She got lost in the complex jargon of her field. "You're talking like you're at the university again." "Mama," Mira said, watching the playback. "You need to talk like you're talking to me." Taking a deep breath, Annika tried again. She forgot about the universities and the foundations and the old professor. She imagined she was just explaining her discovery to her curious, intelligent daughter. "Hi," she began, her voice softer now, more natural. "My name is Annika, and I need to show you something." She kept it simple. She explained what the vellum shards were, how everyone thought they were a failed language. She then explained her theory that they were a map. She used a marker to draw the key symbols on the white paper, explaining how they worked like coordinates. She didn't dive into the complex math. She just showed the result. "In this map," she said, her voice growing with passion, "it doesn't just show the sky. It predicts something. It predicts that two dead stars called neutron stars, are going to crash into each other." She wrote the date and the time on the white paper in big, clear numbers. "It will happen right here," she said, circling a set of coordinates she had also written down. "You won't be able to see it with your eyes. You'll need a telescope, a pretty good one. But if you point it to this spot in the sky, at this exact time, you will see it." I know this sounds crazy. The entire scientific community thinks I'm crazy, but I'm not. This is real. And I just need someone, anyone, to look. She ended the video there, looking directly into the lens with a raw, pleading expression. Mira uploaded it to a popular video sharing site with a simple title, "Look here on this date." The first few hours were brutal. The comments flooded in, and they were merciless. "Another flat earther," one read. "Get some help, lady," said another. "Crank alert," posted a third. It was a public humiliation, a digital version of the conference room where she had been torn down. She felt a familiar wave of despair wash over her. She had failed again. But then something strange happened. A small astronomy forum run by amateur enthusiasts picked up the video. At first they mocked it too. But then one of the members, a retired engineer, decided to run her numbers. "Okay, this is weird," he posted. "Her math is unconventional. But it's not wrong. The coordinates are valid. And the date for a neutron star collision in that region is, well, it's plausible. It's a 1 in a billion shot, but it's not impossible." Slowly, a small, unlikely community began to form around her prediction. A handful of amateur astronomers in different parts of the world decided they had nothing to lose. They programmed their telescopes with her coordinates. They became her secret army, her lone witnesses. The final blow came just 2 weeks before the predicted date. A press release from the Old Professors Foundation appeared in all the major science news outlets. It was a formal, authoritative statement titled, "A Cautionary Tale Against Pseudoscience." It didn't name her directly, but the description was unmistakable. It warned the public about unverified individuals making sensational claims on the internet and urged everyone to rely on proper, peer-reviewed scientific inquiry. It was the final, public nail in the coffin of her reputation. They hadn't just dismissed her. They had branded her a danger to the public understanding of science. Annika read the statement in her garage, the light from her monitor illuminating the tears on her cheeks. It was over. The scientific world had spoken, and its voice was loud and clear. She had lost. The world would not be watching. But as she wiped her eyes, she thought of the half-dozen emails she had received that morning from strangers with telescopes in Chile. In Australia? In a small town in Ohio? We'll be watching, they said. We've got our eyes on the sky for you. It wasn't the whole world, but it was a start. And as the final countdown began, it was all she had. The final 24 hours felt like the longest week of Annika's life. The world outside the garage continued its indifferent rotation. But inside, time had slowed to a crawl, stretching each second into a thin, taut wire of anticipation. The red circle on the kitchen calendar seemed to burn with a light of its own, a constant silent reminder of everything that was at stake. The house was quiet. Mira was staying at Rohan's for the night, a decision Annika had made with a heavy heart. She couldn't bear the thought of her daughter seeing her world either collapse or be reborn. This was a burden she had to carry alone. The garage was her command center, her cockpit, her sanctuary. The main monitor displayed a live feed from the Chandra X-ray Observatory, a powerful space telescope that could see the universe in ways the human eye never could. It was just a black rectangle dotted with a few faint, distant specks of light, the unassuming patch of deep space where her fate awaited. On a smaller screen to her left, she had a chat window open. It was a private channel she had set up for the small group of amateur astronomers who had pledged to watch. Their names scrolled by: a teacher in Portugal, a retired engineer in Ohio, a farmer in rural Australia. Strangers bound by a single, improbable thread of belief. The hours ticked by. Annika drank cup after cup of strong black coffee, her nerves humming like a high-voltage wire. She walked around the small space, her footsteps echoing on the concrete floor. She looked at the printouts of the star map, the equations, the glyphs. It all looked so solid, so logical on paper. But out there, in the infinite, cold darkness of space, logic was just a theory. Anything could happen. A calculation could be off by a single decimal point. A variable she hadn't even considered could render the whole thing useless. Doubt. A cold and slithering creature began to wrap itself around her heart. She thought of the old professor's dismissive face, the polite but crushing rejection emails, the public shaming from the foundation. They were the voices of reason, of experience, of the entire established scientific world. And she was just one woman in a garage armed with a crazy idea and a handful of believers. What if they were right? What if this was all just a magnificent, self-deluding fantasy? At 1 a.m. GMT, the messages in the chat window started coming in faster. Skies are clear here in Ohio. Telescope is calibrated. All systems green. Same in Portugal. Waiting for the witching hour. My wife thinks I've lost my mind. It's 11 a.m. here. Bright and sunny. Got a good filter on. Ready when you are, Annika? Got. Annika typed back a simple, thank you. Me too. Her hands were trembling. At 2 a.m., the chatter died down. It was time. The 17 minutes until the predicted moment felt like an eternity. Annika found herself holding her breath without realizing it. She forced herself to breathe, in and out, watching the clock on her computer screen tick down the seconds. 2:10, 2:12, 2:15. The screen was still black. The distant stars hadn't moved. Nothing was happening. The cold creature of doubt in her chest tightened its grip. It's not going to happen, a voice in her head whispered. You made a fool of yourself. You dragged these good people into your fantasy. You've ruined everything. 2:16 a.m. Annika's shoulders slumped. A wave of nausea washed over her. It was over. She had been wrong. The old professor was right. She was just a fantasist. She reached out to close the laptop, to shut down the feed and disappear into the shame that was waiting for her. And then it happened. It wasn't a slow brightening. It was an explosion. A brilliant, violent flash of pure white light erupted from the pinpoint of space on the screen. It was so intense it seemed to burn a hole in the blackness, a sudden shocking wound in the fabric of the universe. The flash lasted only a second, but it was followed by a rapidly expanding bruise of color, beautiful, terrifying cloud of purple, blue, and gold energy blooming in the void. It was a cosmic firework, a silent, spectacular scream of light and power. Annika froze, her hand hovering over the mouse. Her mind went blank. The sheer impossible beauty of it stole the air from her lungs. It was real. It was actually undeniably, breathtakingly real. Her phone, lying face up on the table, buzzed. It was a text from the engineer in Ohio. "Oh my God, Annika. ICIT. We CIT. You were right." The phone buzzed again, and again, and again. A cascade of messages flooded the chat window. "Visible here. Unbelievable. Portugal reporting a confirmed visual. It's exactly where you said it would be. My telescope software is going crazy. The energy readings are off the charts. You did it. You actually did it." The phone started ringing, a shrill, insistent sound that snapped her out of her trance. It was an unknown number. She answered it, her hand shaking so badly she almost dropped it. Dr. Sharma. Annika Sharma. A frantic voice on the other end said, it was a journalist from a major science news outlet. "We're getting reports from observatories all over the world. A kilonova event. At the coordinates you posted online. Annika, can you confirm? Did you predict this?" Before she could answer, another call came in. Then another. Her email inbox, which had been a graveyard of silence for months, suddenly filled up with hundreds of new messages. Notifications from news apps, social media tags, requests for comments. The silence had broken, and the world was now screaming her name. She sank into her chair. The phone still to her ear, but she wasn't really listening to the journalist's frantic questions anymore. She was watching the slow, beautiful fade of the cosmic cloud on her monitor. The event was already being named. On a science blog, a headline flashed, "The Annika Event. Amateur astronomer and outcast scientist predicts the impossible." The old professor's foundation, which had been so quick to publicly shame her, was now conspicuously silent. Their website, which had featured the cautionary tale just days ago, was suddenly down for scheduled maintenance. The academic journals that had rejected her paper were now scrambling, their editors sending desperate, polite emails, asking if she would consider submitting her work for accelerated peer review. The world she had been locked out of was now hammering on her door, begging to be let in. Annika finally hung up the phone, placing it face down on the table as if it were a dangerous object. The garage was quiet again, but it was a different kind of quiet now. It wasn't the lonely silence of an outcast. It was the stunned, reverent silence that follows a miracle. She looked around the cluttered space, at the star charts taped to the walls, the empty coffee mugs, at the printouts of her theory. It all looked different now. It wasn't the evidence of a madwoman's obsession. It was the blueprint of a discovery that was about to change the world. She thought of Mira, sleeping soundly at her father's house, unaware that her mother's lonely vigil had just ended in a blaze of glory. A slow, tired smile spread across Annika's face. They hadn't believed in her. The entire scientific establishment had called her a fool, a fraud, a fantasy. But the stars, the ancient, silent stars, had believed in her, and tonight they had spoken her name to the world. The first light of dawn was seeping through the small, grimy window of the garage, painting stripes of pale gold across the concrete floor. Annika hadn't slept. She sat in her chair, watching the final. Ghostly remnants of the cosmic cloud fade on her monitor, a digital ghost of a miracle. The frantic energy of the night had subsided, replaced by a profound, bone-deep weariness. Her phone, which had been screaming for attention for hours, now lay silent, its battery finally drained. The world was still waking up to the news, but in her small corner of it, there was a strange and peaceful calm. The first thing she did, even before making coffee, was drive to Rohan's apartment. She pulled up just as he was walking out to get the paper. He saw her face, and he stopped dead in his tracks. He didn't say anything, just opened his arms, and she walked into them. It was the first real hug they had shared in years. "I'm so sorry, Annika," he whispered into her hair, his voice thick with emotion. "I was so scared for you. I didn't. I couldn't see it." "It's okay," she murmured, pulling back. "I was scared too." Mira was at the door, her sleepy eyes widening when she saw her mother. "Mama, you're here. Did it happen? Did the stars crash?" Annika knelt down, pulling her daughter into a tight hug. Yes, my love. They crashed. Just like I said they would. A slow, brilliant smile spread across Mira's face. I knew it, she said, with the proud certainty of a child who had never doubted. I told everyone at school my mama was a star detective. The days that followed, the world didn't just change. It exploded. The event was being called the Annika event, in every language. Her face was on the cover of magazines she had only ever dreamed of being published in. News channels ran 24-hour cycles analyzing her discovery, bringing in experts who, just weeks before, had been dismissing her. They now spoke of her with a reverent awe, calling her a lone genius and a pioneer who bravely challenged the establishment. The narrative was being rewritten in real time, and she was its hero. The video she had made in her garage went viral, viewed hundreds of millions of times. The comments had shifted from mockery to praise. From crank alert to future Nobel Prize winner, the small group of amateur astronomers who had stood by her were hailed as heroes. Their grainy telescope footage shone alongside the professional data from the space observatories. They were the witnesses. The proof that her discovery had been a collaborative act of faith, the university that had encouraged her. To leave was now in a panic. The dean called her personally, his voice a frantic, sputtering mess of apologies and invitations. The department was buzzing with a new energy, a desperate desire to be associated with her. Her old office was offered back to her, this time with a new, bigger window. But the most significant moment came a week later. The prestigious research foundation, the one led by the old professor, announced a major press conference. Annika watched it live on her laptop, from the same garage where she had been exiled. The board of directors stood at a podium, their faces grim but resolute. And then, the old professor stepped forward. He looked older, smaller than she remembered. The silver hair was still immaculate, but the commanding presence was gone, replaced by a visible weariness. He cleared his throat, and the room fell silent. For 60 years, he began, his voice steady but quiet. I have believed that the path of knowledge was a slow, deliberate, and collective journey. I believed in consensus, in the careful, peer-reviewed structure of science. And in that belief, I became blind. I became a guardian of the door, rather than an explorer of what lay beyond it. He paused, looking directly into the camera, and Annika felt as though he was looking right at her. Double quotes, Dr. Annika Sharma came to that door with a key that none of us could see, because we were too busy staring at the lock. We did not just dismiss her. We were wrong. We were arrogant, and we were wrong. Her discovery is not just a monumental leap for astronomy and archaeology. It is a profound lesson in humility for all of us in the scientific community. On behalf of this foundation, and personally from me, I offer my deepest, most sincere apologies to Dr. Sharma. We failed her. And in doing so, we almost failed humanity. He then announced the creation of a multi-million-dollar research initiative to be fully funded by his foundation. It would be called the Thorn Initiative, named after the original discoverer of the shards. And its sole purpose would be to decode the rest of the map. Under the leadership of its director, Dr. Annika Sharma, the offer was everything she had ever wanted. Funding, resources, a team, the full weight of the scientific establishment behind her. When the university president called her a few hours later, he expected her to be ecstatic. We are prepared to offer you a full professorship, of course, he said, in your own dedicated research building. The Thorn Initiative will be housed here. It's a tremendous honor. Annika was quiet for a moment, looking around her garage. At the whiteboard with its worn-out marker lines, at the stack of star charts. At the picture Mira had drawn of a rocket ship flying to a swirly star. Thank you, she said, her voice calm and clear. I accept the position of director. But the initiative will not be housed here. It will be housed at a new, independent facility, and I will be choosing my own team. The president was taken aback. Of course, you will have final approval on all hires. No, Annika said, cutting him gently. I will be choosing my team. Starting with the amateur astronomers who watched with me, The teacher in Portugal, the engineer in Ohio, the farmer in Australia. They are my first hires. If they want the job, of course. She was no longer asking for a seat at their table. She was building her own. 6 months later, Annika stood at a podium in a large lecture hall. It was the same hall where she had been humiliated, but it felt like a different universe now. It was standing room only. The faces looking up at her were not masked with polite condescension, but lit with excitement and admiration. They were students and colleagues and journalists, all hanging on her every word. On the screen behind her was the star map, no longer a theory, but an accepted fact. A beautiful, complex web of light that had changed the world for 12,000 years. This map has waited, Annika began, her voice echoing in the packed hall. It has waited through the rise and fall of empires, through wars and discoveries. It was a message in a bottle, sent across an ocean of time. And for a while, we were too proud to read it. She smiled, a genuine warm smile that reached her eyes. They didn't believe in her, she said, echoing the title that had become her story. But that part of the story is over. The real work begins now. She gestured to the map. This isn't just a map of where we've been. It's a map of where we can go. It's not an endpoint. It's a starting line. And our journey is just beginning.